Why the heck do non-English musicals just hit better? For the purposes of this video essay, I have chosen to use the phrase non-English as opposed to foreign because I happen to know several people who live in the countries some of these musicals are from, and therefore to them, this video will not be referring to foreign musicals. So for the sake of my own sanity, I am choosing to use non-English because it is quite literally the best descriptive for the musicals I'm going to be discussing. So anybody who knows me at all, and anyone who has been on my channel for any amount of time, will know that I am a huge musical theatre nerd. I absolutely love musical theatre, only topped by my love of drama because I'm sorry, I was a theatre drama kid first, but the musicals came a very swift second, and I love them, man. The thing is that while I love a great deal of English language musicals, and some of my favourites like Miss Saigon are just phenomenal, most of my favourites, as of the last couple of years in particular, are not in English. And I want to talk about why. Because non-English musicals seem to have a way of taking hold of my heart and destroying it or uplifting it depending on the genre of the piece in question. And this actually includes non-English translations and versions of musicals that originated in English. For example, the German version of Wicked. Damn! That was just phenomenally mind-blowing, and I'm sorry, my allegiance has swiftly changed. I am fully on board with the German version of Wicked, and it basically left the English version in the dust for me. I still love the English version of Wicked, but my god, the German version blew it completely out of the water. So why is that? Alright, let's start by talking about Elisabeth. Elisabeth is a German language musical, which has actually been translated into 7 different languages, and it is the most successful German language musical at the time of this recording. And now I will attempt to give you the briefest and most simplified version of the plot of this musical. In the land of the dead, Luigi Lucchini tells us that Death was in love with the Empress Elisabeth, and she with him. Lucchini claims that he assassinated Elisabeth as she wished because she wanted to die. Der Tod, Death, then arrives and is very awkward and suspicious when he is asked about Elisabeth. Wibbly wobbly timey wimey bits! We then see the life of Elisabeth, starting with her as a young child. While she is a youngster, she meets the most beautiful metaphor for mental illness ever. Der Tod, Death. She got married way too fast to a guy she did not know, Franz Joseph, the Emperor of Austria, and becomes the Empress. However, they soon realise that this marriage of fairy tale-ness was kind of a bad idea. Her mother-in-law absolutely sucks ass, and Elisabeth ends up with a eating disorder, mental problems, and feeling very lonely, even in a massive castle full of servants. Lots of Elisabeth's kids die. It's not a good time. Death keeps showing up, and every time Elisabeth really wants to snog him, but manages to resist, keeping him at bay. Elisabeth and her hubby try to reunite, with mixed results. Death continues to show up again and again, and Elisabeth finds it harder and harder to resist him, but Elisabeth continues to hold him at bay even while her mental and physical health are declining. While Elisabeth and her husband are distracted with their own lives, they neglect their troubled son, Rudolph. Death takes this opportunity to get close to the boy, and after being rejected after reaching out to his parents one final time, we have the mailing kiss. Elisabeth then wanders the world lost and sick and lonely, but at this time Death refuses to come to her. She has spurned him too many times, and now it is he who is spurning her. Several years pass, and then our narrator Lucchini makes an agreement with Death to assassinate Elisabeth. As she dies, Death finally comes to her, carries her in his arms, and takes her away. I did not promise that all of these musicals were going to be cheerful. That was never a promise that I made. Bear that one in mind. So what makes Elisabeth particularly notable then? For me in particular, it's moments like De Schatten werden Linger. My German is nowhere near as good as my Russian, and my Russian is not that great, so sorry about that pronunciation there. And you also have Elisabeth's very powerful moment where she is singing that she belongs to herself and herself alone, even though Death and her husband are trying to convince her otherwise. Bear with me here, but if you have seen the Gerard Butler Phantom of the Opera movie, you have seen Elisabeth's The Dress. The dress that Christine Daae wears while she is performing, the big white number with the stars in her hair, yeah, that is Elisabeth's dress. And I wasn't the only person who was a little confused as to why they chose to use that at the time, but hey, it's a beautiful dress and deserves to be seen by more people. The reason that I in particular love Elisabeth the musical, and the reason that a lot of other people I've spoken to about it seem to love it as well, is because it's not afraid to be dark and twisted and beautiful all at once. The character of Death, de Tod, started out as a metaphor for Elisabeth's mental health, and every time he showed up it was in her darkest, weakest moments when she was contemplating ending her life. And while over the years the character of Death in that show has been turned into more of a generic love interest, to the detriment of the show, and here is a wonderful video essay explaining why, but it does still remain a harrowingly beautiful piece. Visually, it is stunning. Now, these musicals, all the ones I'm talking about, are available to watch on YouTube with subtitles, so I'll be linking all of those down below. Please go and watch them. But Elisabeth in particular is so visually captivating. If you love shows like The Phantom of the Opera, like Les Mis, like Miss Saigon, if you love big spectacle pieces, Elisabeth is definitely one for you. But what makes Elisabeth hit different then, in comparison to shows like Les Mis or The Phantom of the Opera? In particular, The Phantom of the Opera, because it is the most glaringly obvious comparison. A woman is being haunted essentially by a spectral figure who has a certain sway and pull over her, and she has another suitor who is also vying for her attention, and she is pulled back and forth between these two people. It's a rather simplistic comparison, but a comparison that can be drawn nonetheless. But why does Elisabeth hit better than, say, The Phantom of the Opera? For me, it comes down to how each of the characters is shown. I just can't help feeling that within The Phantom of the Opera in particular, we don't get to know Christine Daae very well. Despite being essentially the main player, we only see her through the lens of other people. We don't get to learn very much in depth about the Phantom either. Sure, we hear some of his tragic backstory, but, you know, what else? We really don't know very much about them. They don't feel particularly fleshed out. I still love the show, and I still enjoy them all as characters, but I would be kidding myself if I said I thought I knew them very well by the end of it. However, in Elisabeth the musical, you know these characters. You know exactly who Elisabeth is and what she wants for herself in her life within the first song that she sings, which, by the way, is a duet with her father. It's not even a solo, and within that song we already know everything we need to know about her, but we keep finding out more as the show goes on. In that first duet, we find out that she loves poetry, she wants to be free, she wants to travel, she wants to be a free spirit, like she sees her father as. And it makes it so much more tragic that she doesn't get that. She still wants it, she still yearns for it, she still tries to give it to herself all the way through the show, particularly towards the end when she has lost almost everybody in her life. Her son Rudolph has just died, and she is left wandering the world trying to get this freedom back, and she just can't. And we know that because we found it all out within the first minute and a half of knowing her character. We also find out a lot about her husband, Franz Josef, before the two of them even meet. We see his interactions with his mother. We know exactly what she is like. We see all of the expectations put upon him, particularly by his mother, and we see how willing he is to push them, which is not a lot. We see that he has genuine feelings for Elisabeth, and him going against the recommendations of his mother and all the expectations of everybody else is almost blowing his own mind a little bit as well, but he does it because for the first time seemingly in his life he's doing something for him and not for the expectations of other people. And sure, the consequences are pretty catastrophic, but we still know why he made that choice. And we even find out a fair amount about Death himself as well. Sure, he's a little bit trickier, especially when he's being seen as just a personified metaphor for, you know, death and mental illness, but hell, we still find out a lot about him. We know that his purpose, his whole existence, is to guide souls to the other side. That's what he does. He does that, that's all he does, and then suddenly there was this person, and his whole world was turned upside down by this person who he just could not stop thinking and feeling about, and how that hit him and affected him, and how he didn't wanna, and yet. So that is why, for me, Elisabeth the musical hits harder than any English musical I've seen, and in particular The Phantom of the Opera, which is the easiest one to compare it to directly, because we know these characters so much better, we care about them so much more, and it makes everything hit harder because of it. Next up, we have the very specifically Swedish version of Jesus Christ Superstar. Now, this is an example of a musical that was originally in English being translated and performed in another language, in this case Swedish, and just being done better. I would like to insert a very small caveat here and reaffirm that Ben Forster is still my favourite Jesus of all time. His Gethsemane will never be topped even by the guy I'm going to be discussing in the Swedish version. So Ben Forster on his own, best Jesus ever. However, the best version of Jesus Christ Superstar the show is the 2014 Swedish cast. The specific version I'm talking about today is the 2014 Swedish Arena Tour. In this production, the role of Jesus was played by Ola Salo, and I am sorry for butchering that name. Also interesting to note though, as well as playing Jesus, this guy also translated the entire show. And now let me give you a quick plot breakdown for anyone who does not know the story of Jesus. Firstly, Jesus is in a shopping cart. Let that sink in, please. It's a very enjoyable image. Jesus Christ and his followers are leather-clad fighters, fighting for a better world, fighting for a good cause. Judas, however, is concerned, worried that they are going too far. Jesus dismisses him. The apostles want a plan, but Jesus is tired. Mary comforts him, but Judas gets into a three-way, argument with both of them, over Mary spending money and Jesus doing nothing. The priests and leaders are pissed about Jesus and plan his destruction. The apostles have a riot/celebration. They want to fight. Jesus, however, is melancholy and tries to tell them that they are wrong. He says, to defeat death you only have to die, and his nose begins to bleed. Judas and Mary try to comfort him. Pilate has a disturbing dream. Foreshadowing! The apostles visit a temple and Jesus goes mad, finding it has become a place of dodgy dealings and sin. Jesus sings sadly to himself of how he has tried and tried for years, but it feels like he has done nothing. Judas watches this sorrowfully. Then a gaggle of sick people swarm Jesus, wanting his healing. Overwhelmed, he yells at them to go away. Mary comes in to help, singing of how she doesn't know how to love him, and they kiss. Judas has seen this too and angrily runs in, but an already overwhelmed Jesus runs away. Judas, distraught, runs to the priests. The priests prey on, pun intended, his hurt and confusion, convincing him to tell them where Jesus is. Judas, believing that he is helping Jesus, tells the priests where they can find him. The Last Supper then happens. Jesus and Judas argue. Jesus knows what Judas has done, and Judas storms away. Then we have the best song of the entire show, Gethsemane. Judas comes back while Jesus is alone and they kiss. The guards then arrest Jesus. Judas tries to get Jesus released, horrified that he has now been tortured and hurt, but the priests laugh at him and send him away. Judas sings of how he doesn't know how to love Jesus and unalives himself. Pilate then ends up having to sentence Jesus to death in a horrible moment where he realizes his dream has now come true. Jesus is then crucified on the cross and hallucinates that Judas is with him in his last moments before he, too, dies. Again, I never said these shows were going to be cheerful! What is notable then about the 2014 Swedish version of Jesus Christ Superstar? Particularly notable moments are of course Gethsemane, which is one of my favourite musical theatre songs of all time. And in Swedish, it's gorgeous. What can I say? And then you also have moments like Damned for All Time / Blood Money, which is Judas's moment with the priests where he ends up betraying Jesus. And something that the Swedish production did that I have not seen any other production do is they held that moment where Judas is left on his own and the chorus is singing, "Well done, Judas, good old Judas." And there's a spotlight and they've chucked money at him. And because it's modern day, it's all like dollar bills and they're raining down over his head. And it's like acid rain to him and he's almost trying to get them off him. And the look on Peter's face, sorry, Judas's face, but Peter's the guy playing him. The look on his face when he's thinking about what he's done and how he thinks it's the right thing, but he's no longer convinced. And they just hold that moment. They don't cut, they don't fade to black. He is just kneeling there for ages. And it goes on and on and on, and you can just hear the shallow breathing. It's devastating to watch, and I have yet to see an English production that went that hard on that particular moment. Why is the Swedish cast in particular so special then? Well, a lot of it does have to do with their unflinching portrayal of the LGBTQ-ness of this story. There is bi-ness to Jesus, there is queerness to Judas, there is, well, Mary could be straight, but I've never read her as a particularly straight character. I'm seeing a total amount of bi-ness there. And I just feel like those moments were so much clearer in the Swedish version. They were given more room to breathe. Every other production of Jesus Christ Superstar that I have seen, including my favourite English version with Tim Minchin and Ben Forster, the moments between Judas and Jesus in particular, and Judas, Jesus and Mary, they weren't fleshed out enough for me. They weren't given breathing room. They were going from song to song to song, which I do think is the biggest weakness of Jesus Christ Superstar as a musical performance. It's more like a concert than a musical. because there's no dialogue. There's no in-between moments, there's no scenes, there's no spoken anything. And I feel like that's why I prefer the 2014 Swedish version, because while they didn't add any extra dialogue, they did add those extra moments. You don't just go from a song to a song to a song, you see the decisions people are making. You see Judas watching Mary singing her heart out about how she doesn't know how to love Jesus, and realizing that they both are in love with this man and don't know how to care for him. And Judas at that moment is behind a wrought iron fence. It's a huge symbol of the fact that he feels that he can't get to Jesus in the way that Mary seemingly can, even though she is literally singing about how she doesn't know how to love him. And Judas is clutching onto this fence and staring at this scene, and it really makes you understand why he made the decisions that he did next. You also see that Jesus genuinely does love them both in how he acts with both of them. He just doesn't know how to compute all of that together with the fact that he knows he's about to die. He clearly doesn't want to hurt either of them, and he knows he's about to leave them and therefore wants to make the most of all of his time with everybody. And then, of course, right at the end of the show, he hallucinates about his dead boyfriend, so, you know, there's that. There is, of course, the beautiful kiss moment where Judas and Jesus actually do kiss. When Jesus sings, "Judas, must you betray me with a kiss?" And that line comes after they have just reunited and snogged each other's faces off. I feel like it's just more gut punching. Again, I did not say these musicals were going to be happy. So that for me is why the 2014 Swedish Jesus Christ Superstar hits harder than any English version I have ever seen, with the exception of Ben Forster singing Gethsemane, because not a single person in the entire world, sorry Allah, not a single person can top Ben Forster singing Gethsemane. However, if we could cut from Ben Forster singing Gethsemane to the 2014 Swedish Jesus Christ Superstar, Snog, and then everything else, that would be perfection. So it seems again that in the instances of Elisabeth and Jesus Christ Superstar, the thing that is pulling me towards the non-English musicals is the portrayals of the characters. While the actors on both sides can be equally as talented, the fact seems to be that the characters in the non-English shows are just fleshed out more, given more time and more everything, really, and thus are more compelling for me to watch. The next show I'm going to talk about is... it's something. It is, of course, Tanz der Vampire. Just hear me out, okay? Tanz der Vampire is a remake of the 1967 film of the same name. It is a German language musical, however, I would just like to say that I personally adore it in Russian, but that is, you know, my bias for Russian showing through right there. I would also like to point out that the lyrics and the book for Tanz der Vampire were written by someone called Michael Kunz, who also wrote Elisabeth and Rebecca. Clearly, I have a type and this guy is it. And now... for the briefest of rundowns of the crazy plot of Tanz der Vampire. Here we go. A young, sweet and slightly naive man called Alfred is an assistant to a professor. They are trying to prove that vampires exist. Hint, hint, they do. While walking in the snow and the cold, they are taken in by an innkeeper and his wife. The townspeople sing a song about garlic. Wonder why. Alfred meets Sarah, the innkeeper's daughter, and immediately falls for her. They learn of a castle where a mysterious count lives. They sing of their attraction to one another, but late at night, Sarah is visited by a mysteriously vampire-shaped stranger. The next night, Sarah is in the bath again when the mysteriously vampire-shaped stranger reappears and invites her to a midnight ball at his castle. It turns out he is Count von Krolak. Shocking, I know. But before he can bite her, Alfred calls for help and Sarah's father forbids her from ever leaving the premises. A mysteriously vampire-wrapped parcel arrives for Sarah, who sneaks outside and opens it, finding expensive red boots inside. Alfred then comes out, oi oi, be still Herbert's beating heart, and he sees Sarah. He tells Sarah that he has feelings for her, but when he goes back inside the inn, Sarah fantasizes about the vampire ball, and the best dance sequence I have ever seen takes place. Please enjoy. I'm gonna put a bunch of it on screen right now. Sarah then trots off to the castle wearing her shiny new red boots. Alfred and the professor go after her when her father, who initially tried to chase her, is found dead, but then becomes a vampire. Arriving at the castle, the Count greets them and brings out his stunning son, Herbert, to entertain Alfred. They wander around the castle for a while, and then we have the Totally Finsternis song. You will recognise this song even if you have never seen this musical before. It's to the tune of Total Eclipse of the Heart by Bonnie Tyler. But the lyrics are different. That night in the castle, Alfred has a nightmare, in which the second best dance sequence ensues. Shenanigans then ensue. Alfred is looking for Sarah while being pursued himself by Herbert. The professor and Albert try to stake the vampires. Sarah refuses to leave and is bitten by the Count at the ball. Alfred and the professor do manage to take Sarah away from the castle. However, while singing of their love for each other, Sarah turns and bites Alfred, the pair becoming vampires and running off together. Now, I will argue that this one can technically be seen as having a happy ending. Shush. What is it that makes Tanz der Vampire so amazing? Well, it is well named. The Dance of the Vampires. This musical lives on its dance numbers, while the comedy is also absolutely spot on and the songs are fantastic. The dance numbers are absolutely where it's at its peak. The only dance numbers I have ever witnessed that will top Carpe Noctem or the Dance of the Red Boots are Matthew Bourne's Swan Lake, Dorian Gray and Edward Scissorhands, and they're not musicals, so they totally don't count for this list. The dances are not just spectacles to watch, they are telling the story as well, which arguably should be the role of a dance sequence in musical theatre. It should be to carry on the story and to tell you things. It should work within the world of the musical. However, sometimes dances in musicals are just that, a dance. And it doesn't really add or do anything. And while they're great fun to watch, I like my storytelling, and every single moment in Tanz der Vampire is a part of the story. In particular, the fantasy about the Red Boots and Alfred's nightmare. And you also have the stunning visuals that they use, like the mirror trick. This is used in dance scenes and in just small moments between Herbert and Alfred, where they are moving around together and you see the person in the mirror and it's just Alfred by himself and there's no Herbert. That is beautiful. Again, beautiful choreography, so immaculately done, perfect use of sets and prop design. It's all amazingly clever, visually stunning, and just such great storytelling as well. So Tanz der Vampire, the name says it all, the Dance of the Vampires that just hits so much harder and so much better than any English musical I have ever seen. And now we come to my favourite musical. I'm not even sorry, I'm going to talk about this forever. I'm going to have to cut so much out of this when I edit this. Oh. Poslední Ispitanie, The Last Trial, the Dragonlance musical. I'm even wearing my Poslední Ispitanie outfit right now. So look, you can't get merch of this show. That's how niche this show is. You cannot get merch of this show in the UK, and I have tried. There is nothing on Etsy, not a single thing. And that is how you know that you are into a really niche thing, because there is not a single thing on Etsy, and most of the fan fiction is in Russian, which luckily I'm learning how to read now, which is why I've been making my own merch. The Last Trial is a Russian musical which is loosely based on the story and life of Raistlin Magyar from the Dragonlance books. It was first partially shown in 1998 at a Russian con. In 2016, a filmed version of the show was brought out, and in 2017, one of my favourite versions of the show was brought out, filmed, and as a touring version as well. I will now attempt to summarise the plot of Poslední Ispitanie. Here we go. Raistlin Magyar, a dark mage, is haunted by visions of his dead mother and determined to get into the abyss to defeat the goddess Takesis. His twin brother Kadamon manages to wake him from his nightmares and tries to persuade Raistlin to abandon his plan to become a god. Raistlin refuses, saying that his brother could never understand. Raistlin then goes to meet Krysania, a priestess of light, who warns him to stop what he is doing, but Raistlin tells her to follow him and learn why he is doing this. Krysania is determined to turn Raistlin to the light and goes to look for him. She finds Kadamon, who is drunk and saddened, and often upside down in a barrel. He is saddened because Raistlin has abandoned him and refuses to call him his brother anymore. Kadamon does, however, end up accompanying Krysania on her quest. Meanwhile, the Conclave of Mages meet to tell Dalimar, Raistlin's apprentice, to kill his master. But Dalimar persuades them to send Krysania instead, and so Krysania and Kadamon are sent to the city of Istar to go after Raistlin. It turns out Dalimar is acting on Raistlin's instructions, as he needs Krysania to help him open a gate into the abyss which can be found in Istar. Once they are all in Istar, Raistlin warns Crysania that this perfect city is actually filled with corruption. He then discovers that Cadamon has been thrown into jail. He then persuades the Priest King, who at that point believes Raistlin to be a trusted advisor, to put Cadamon into the arena to fight for his and Crysania's freedom. However, the god Paladine is pissed at what the Priest King has been doing in his name and destroys the city and the gate to the abyss. Crysania is heartbroken and leaves with Raistlin. Caramon is mad at his brother for throwing him into the arena, but Raistlin asks for his help and convinces Caramon to lead an army so that he can take over another place where there is another gate into the abyss. Raistlin and Crysania grow closer, initially as a ploy by Raistlin, but he realizes abruptly that he does actually love her. Oops. As they kiss, Takhisis shows up to taunt Raistlin. She tells him that he should want love and confuses him into pushing Crysania away, and he screams at her and Cadamon to leave him alone. Crysania runs, but Cadamon manages to calm Raistlin out of his visions and sings the most gut-wrenching song about brotherly love and how he wishes they could go back to childhood. Then Cadamon leaves. Raistlin and Crysania reconcile and open the gate into the abyss. Down in the abyss, Takhisis begins to torment Raistlin with visions. She shows him Crysania turning on him, his childhood bullies and Dalamar tormenting him, his brother murdering him, his mother, and eventually she overpowers him and kills Raistlin. Crysania appears and runs to the dead Raistlin, and learning that he is dead, she sings an epic song and sacrifices herself to revive him. Raistlin comes back to life and defeats Takhisis, but when a dying Crysania asks him to be with her, Raistlin pushes her away, saying that love is the price for becoming a god. He must give up love, and, he claims, the price is not high. Crysania dies, and Raistlin does become a god. But Raistlin at the end of the show is left alone in a dark void because he cannot love, cannot create, and is now the lord of nothing. And it's too late. Again, I did not tell you it would have a happy ending, but one could argue that this was a justified ending based on his actions. Small caveat, there is also an alternate ending which features the ending from the books where Cadamon goes back in time, manages to convince Raistlin not to do the things he does. Raistlin ends up locked in the abyss and then comes out and finds Crysania later on. However, most versions of the show do end with Raistlin down in the abyss realizing he fucked up, and personally I find that a much more gut-punching ending, so that's all I'm going to go with for discussing it now. Some notable moments I would like to talk about in this show are the wonderful use of the ensemble dancers showing Raistlin and Takhisis' black magic. As they dance around Takhisis while she's luring Raistlin in, and while they're dancing around Raistlin while he's performing his spells, it just adds an extra touch of the magic that a completely blank stage with special effects just wouldn't have. You also have Crysania's spectacular high notes. So, what makes The Last Trial so much more impactful than any English musical, or in fact any of the other musicals on this list, English or not? What makes it so much more special for me? Well, predominantly again, it comes down to how in-depth we get to know these characters, how we understand them and how we see their struggles, and while we may not agree with them, we can understand why they make the decisions that they do. Let's look at the character of Cadamon. We get to know him so well, and we see his brotherly interactions with Raistlin from the very get-go. The show opens with Raistlin on his own singing about his ambitions, but then very swiftly turns into his tormented nightmares, and Cadamon has to physically break Raistlin out of that spell. Cadamon appears through this sea of dark creatures who are the embodiment of the dark magic catching onto Raistlin, and he pushes his way through them and takes hold of his brother and wakes him out of this nightmare. You see how much he cares, and every time they argue, Cadamon's side is driven by love, and he is scared for his brother. He does not want his twin to do this. He is scared of the path Raistlin is walking, and there's nothing Cadamon can do to bring him back. He can only try to go as far as he can with him. This all comes to a head in a song in Act 2 that Cadamon sings called Lullabye. It is the most heartbreaking song I have ever heard in any musical ever. It still makes me cry. And I have watched this musical a lot now. Catamon has just broken Raistlin out of yet another torturous nightmare. Takhisis has been banished away from him for the moment, Cressania has gone running, and the brothers are left alone in a darkened stage with a light on them, and Raistlin says that he's exhausted and he falls to the floor, and Catamon catches him, and as Catamon is cradling his brother in his arms, kneeling on the floor, he starts to sing, "Do you remember our garden from when we were children? Do you remember how we would play? Do you remember when it was easy, when it was simple? Do you remember when we were still brothers?" And as the song goes on, it gets worse and worse as Catamon pours his heart out to a Raistlin who can barely even hear him. He's so exhausted and half asleep. And as the chorus kicks in, Catamon sings that he wishes this night could stay forever, that he could hold his brother in his arms and Raistlin could just sleep and dream about when they were children and everything was okay. Holy fuck, it made me cry even thinking about it. Okay, we can do this. No English musical ever got me like that. I, as it turns out, am a complete sucker for sibling relationships, sibling bonds, because I love my own siblings a great deal and it probably hits me way too hard, but it has never been shown to me like that before. Never. Every single cast I have seen has performed that relationship perfectly. It doesn't matter which actors are playing Raistlin and Catamon. Yes, it's different each time because different actors have different dynamics, but it seems to be hot-wired into the show itself that the brotherly relationship is always going to be standout. And that is one of the huge things that makes The Last Trial such a knockout show for me and why it hits me harder than any English language musical ever has done. Sticking with the emotional impact this show has, I'm going to talk about Cressania and Raistlin now. Cressania is a character that it would be very easy to over or underwrite. She could very easily be just a two-dimensional caricature. She is a priestess of light and good. She is lawful good, and that could be it. But they did not do that when writing this show. Good God, whether she is belting out high notes or whispering her insecurities or falling in love with Raistlin Megere, very bad idea. Cressania is a fully dimensional character. She is not just somebody who has blind faith in a good deity. She is someone who sees the good in everyone, even the darkest black mage Raistlin Megere. She still sees the good in him and believes that she can bring him back to the light side. Even when she ends up working with him, she believes it's for something good and a good outcome. You feel her heartbreak when she realizes that the city of goodness that she had put so much faith into has let her down because it was actually a place full of corruption. And you feel her heartbreak again at the end of the show when Raistlin pushes her away and says, "You had to die so that I could live. I don't love you anymore because I want to be a god, and that price is something I'm willing to pay." You don't watch this show and think, "Oh, what a silly girl. Of course she's got her comeuppance." You watch it and think, "Oh no, we really hoped he could change." But a bit like when you're watching Hadestown, it's always going to have the same outcome. And then we have my favourite, the character of Raistlin himself. Again, you have the brotherly moments and you see Raistlin's side of it, how he has always had to look up to his warrior brother Catamon, how when he got his magic, it did make him stronger, but it also made him weaker. I also think it's very telling that one of Raistlin's biggest fears that comes out when he is having these nightmare hallucinations when he's in the abyss with Takhisis is his brother Catamon murdering him, an act of final, deepest betrayal. This harkens back to something that's in the books, but because it's not in the show, I'm not going to talk about it just yet, but anyone who's read the books will know what I'm talking about. You see and understand everything that Raistlin is scared of and how he has taken all of that and pushed it into a means, a reason why he is determined to become a god. He is going to ascend and gain the most power so that nothing like that can ever happen to him again. And then at the very end of the show, when he has pushed everyone away from him, his brother, Cressania, and he has finally achieved what he's wanted and become the all-powerful god, it doesn't mean anything. He's left alone. The lyrics translated are, "I don't want to be alone here in the void," but he is. The last line of the show is, "I'm the lord of nothing, and it's too late." And I have never seen a show where I have watched a character's downfall come, where I have felt so sad and sorry for them, and also felt so much like it was justified. Poslední Испытание does that perfectly. The thing is, to sum up all of my thoughts on this, I still love English language musicals. But non-English musicals, or the non-English translations of English musicals, just seem to be better at doing it. So to answer my question then, why do non-English musicals just hit different? Well, it seems to come down to the absolutely immaculate way that they storytell. Through getting us to truly know and understand these characters and why they're making the decisions that they are, and through showing us the stories, not just in stunning visual effects, but by utilizing the dancers and everything within that as well. And that's what keeps me re-watching a Swedish show that's nearly 10 years old. That's what keeps the Elisabeth soundtrack on every playlist I have. That's what had me searching for and happily watching 12 different casts performing Poslední Испытание. Because while I'm not saying that English musicals can't be as good as these shows are, I am saying that as of yet, none of them have been. Small side note for a few honourable mentions, I will miss some of them out, so I will try to add as many as I can think of down in the comments, and please add more if you can think of them too. Both Mozart musicals, Marie Antoinette, Wicked in German, oh my god, please look it up. Just watch the clip of her doing Defying Gravity. It's amazing. Any vampire musical, to be honest, there are quite a few. Any non-English version, the Spanish Phantom of the Opera, oh my word, it's amazing. Basically any non-English musical, yeah, please just Google it, you'll find loads. I will have missed so many out in this video, but I haven't got a lot of time. I will add many more in the comments below. But now I'd like to turn this over to you guys. What are your favourite musicals? Tell me as many as you want. Give me a top 5, top 10, top 3, top 25, I don't know. Chuck them down in the comments below. And also, of course, if you have any other non-English musical recommendations, throw those down as well. As always, thank you for watching this video, my wonderful jelly spoons. If you enjoyed it and would like to support me, I do still have my Patreon. The biggest thing you get on my Patreon is pictures of the dog, but you also get to vote on things that I do. I will be putting up votes for the next few Monday Madnesses you guys can vote on, and I'll be getting you guys to give me your input on various different things I'm creating over the year. I also have a Ko-fi if you don't want to commit to me on a monthly basis, very understandable. On my Ko-fi you can also find my store where I've got various different things, including bleach paint shirts that I paint myself. I'll put some pictures up on the screen right now. You can tell me whatever you would like and I'll put it onto a t-shirt for you. I am going to get my Etsy store up and running soon. I'm sorry I've been holding back on it. I'm still designing what I want to put on there, but eventually that'll be up as well. But whether you can support me on my Ko-fi or my Patreon, or you can just support me by liking and commenting on this video and following me on all my social media, any of those is absolutely fine, and I thank you for your wonderful support. See you in another week, my wonderful jelly spoons. Goodbye.